Unilateral illiberalism. When Ayatollah Khomeini granted Italian journalist Oriana Fallaci an interview in the holy city of Qom in 1979, the meeting was terminated when she tore off the chador she had been made to wear, calling it a stupid medieval rag. When Fallaci met Colonel Gaddafi in Libya, she was blunt: "I want to understand why everyone dislikes you so much, why you are so little loved." And after an extended harangue from Yasser Arafat about the need to eradicate Israel with revolutionary violence, Fallaci drily remarked, "Conclusion: you don't at all want the peace that everyone is hoping for." Bemused viewers of Tucker Carlson's recent interview with Vladimir Putin saw no evidence of the skepticism or thinly veiled contempt that La Fallaci, as she liked to refer to herself, brought to her craft. Nor were they rewarded with an informative glimpse into the Russian despot's mind. Instead, they were treated to an unedifying display of sycophancy that permitted Putin to filibuster for more than 2 hours. In The Rebel, Albert Camus spoke of tyrants conducting monologues above a million solitudes. Thanks to Carlson's flaccid performance, Putin's semi-coherent and ahistorical monologue reached millions more than usual. Carlson is the latest in a long line of credulous partisans so fixated on domestic political vendettas that they wind up as a humiliated mouthpiece for vicious propaganda. In this case, Carlson's attempts to secure endorsement of his parochial obsessions with a series of leading questions went nowhere. By all appearances, Putin had prepared to give an eccentric lecture about the world historical importance of Yaroslav the Wise, Grand Prince of Kiev in 1019. To those with a sense of history, this was no great surprise. The great Australian writer Clive James, in his magisterial Cultural Amnesia, observed that the totalitarian overlord's power to bore was a cherished and necessary component of his repressive apparatus. Putin's tiresome tirade met this standard in every respect. Did Carlson really expect anything less? Did he really think Putin would inveigh against the San Francisco School Board or Hunter Biden? Imagine how disappointed he must have been to learn that the former KGB colonel is not a regular viewer of Fox, let alone Carlson's show on Twitter. Putin's Russia is usually a more savvy purveyor of disinformation, laundered via select dupes and intelligence assets in the Western political and media establishment. It is a crucial component of the hybrid warfare waged against the liberal West by its propaganda and military apparatus. Since the 2000s, Moscow has deployed a state-run media machine to divide and disorient its opponents through foreign-language television such as RT and notionally independent journalists willing to toe the Kremlin line. As the Russian analyst Mikhail Zygar points out in a recent article for Foreign Affairs, Putin's regime has made a great effort to bolster the war on woke, to cultivate allies on the far right in America and Europe. The objective of this campaign is not to restore the civic health of Russia's professed enemies but to sow confusion and enhance extremism in Western societies. That is why the Kremlin supports parties and movements on both the far left and the far right, including the National Front in France, the Alternative for Germany (AfD), and Syriza in Greece. But if Carlson thought that touting Putin's credentials as a good Christian leader and a champion of law and order would earn him the approval of the Russian Tsar, he was mistaken. During the interview, Putin seemed to mock Carlson and later complained about the absence of so-called sharp questions. Seldom has there been such a poor return for ceremonial self-abasement before a blood-drenched ruler. Putin's sneering hauteur could not conceal that he is not a leader to be trusted, still less to admired. And as Carlson fawned over the Russian despot, he displayed a personalized version of what the French philosopher Alain Finkielkraut calls the West's penitential narcissism. Amid the ensuing controversy, Carlson has insisted that he only wanted to shed light on Vladimir Putin's true motives. His role in this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity was never to hold the tyrant to account for his crimes. Carlson may say he is above such ethical minutiae, but this is an inversion of his usual bombastic moralism. In front of Putin, Carlson denounced Volodymyr Zelensky as a dictator and a dangerous authoritarian, even though Zelensky is the democratically elected leader of Ukraine while Putin has remained on his throne by brute force for a quarter century. Beyond the moral equivalence, Carlson is employing the language of high moral dudgeon he now claims to abjure to attack the enemies of Putin's mafia state. Even more striking than the interview itself was Carlson's absurd tour of the Russian capital in the following days. It was there, on the metro, in a supermarket, and at a McDonald's, all of which he compared favorably to those in America, that Carlson channeled his inner Walter Duranty. In the early days of the Soviet Union, Duranty was the Moscow bureau chief for the New York Times, whose dispatches earned him the Pulitzer Prize in 1932 and Stalin's lavish praise. Duranty was hardly alone in this respect. Communist Party leaders would arrange carefully staged tours for sympathetic Western journalists and intellectuals, including George Bernard Shaw, who met with Stalin and claimed that he'd expected to see a Russian worker but found a Georgian gentleman instead. As he departed in 1931, Shaw declared that he was leaving a land of hope for our Western countries, the countries of despair. In 1919, American journalist Lincoln Steffens visited the workers' paradise and gleefully reported, "I have seen the future, and it works." Left unmentioned in these servile reports was the regime's lamentable catalogue of crimes: the midnight arrests, the show trials, the summary executions, the gulag, and the forced famines that left millions dead. Carlson followed his interview and the Potemkin tour of downtown Moscow with a dismal performance at the World Government Summit in Dubai. Even the journalists of that Arab police state were taken aback by the soft line Carlson had taken with Putin. Granted a rare audience with the Russian warden, one of them asked, why hadn't Carlson mentioned the imprisoned opposition leader Alexei Navalny or the hallmarks of Russia's dictatorial rule: naked aggression against neighbors, brazen interference in foreign democracies, censorship of the press, and violent suppression of dissent? Carlson replied that Putin is regularly asked about such awkward topics, apparently unaware of the suffocating repression in Russia, where journalists are reliably subjected to harassment, abuse, and murder. He then redirected the conversation, putting his own country in the dock. "Every leader kills people, including my leader. Leadership requires killing people." Within a fortnight, Navalny was reported dead in a maximum security prison north of the Arctic Circle. Given the Russian security services' previous attempts to kill him, this development suggests that Putin had finally had enough. Heavy lies the crown. Those in the West who nurse delusions about the deep state have a shallow understanding of the respective purposes of state violence in democracies and dictatorships. Carlson's worldview implies that for every Anna Politkovskaya, the Russian journalist who chronicled war crimes in Chechnya and was shot dead in her Moscow apartment building, there is an Osama bin Laden, Omar al-Baghdadi, or Qasem Soleimani dispatched by Navy SEALs. But these discrepant definitions of enemies of the state could not be further apart. America's enemies are in the crosshairs because they are waging violent jihad, while Putin's enemies are murdered because they are peaceful dissenters against his corrupt regime. Whatever they may say in their own defense, those unable or unwilling to draw this distinction are the friends of illegitimate power. On the dedication page of Interviews with History, Oriana Fallaci addressed her book to all those who do not like power. There are obvious problems with such a dogmatic bias, but there are also worse starting points for journalists faced with a man like Putin. Those, like Carlson, who only interrogate domestic partisan opponents will never pose a threat to despotism.